Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be exploring marriage, but not just, the kind of happily ever after fairy tale version.
Right.
We're going way deeper.
Yeah.
Using Ejiman Bonsu's book to understand marriage across cultures, religions, and even the law.
You'll be surprised how much more there is to marriage than you might think. Really, Bonsu takes us way beyond just the vows and the wedding cake, and he reveals this whole world of fascinating customs and kind of clashing expectations.
Yeah.
And he even gives us this kind of framework for what actually makes marriages thrive.
So not just till death do us part, but how to actually, make it till death do us part.
Exactly.
In a healthy way. I like it.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, Bonsu breaks marriage down into 3 different frameworks.
Yeah.
What are they, and why are those distinctions important?
He talks about religious covenants, cultural traditions, and legal contracts.
Okay.
And it's fascinating how all of these can overlap.
They do.
So think about Christian marriage ceremonies.
Yeah.
They're often seen as religious events, but they're also really steeped in cultural traditions.
For sure.
And legally speaking, they create a binding contract.
So one wedding can really tick all 3 of those boxes.
Exactly.
It really highlights how multifaceted marriage is. And I bet for a lot of us, those lines can get blurry.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think one framework tends to be more dominant than others, or does it really just vary by couple and their context?
It varies so much. And actually, Bonsu dives deep into the cultural side by exploring the Ashanti region of Ghana.
Okay.
And family is really central to marriage there. It influences everything from actually choosing a partner to the elaborate ceremonies.
From what I've read, Ashanti weddings sound incredibly vibrant.
They are.
What are some of the traditions that stood out to you?
Well, one that I thought was so interesting was the knocking ceremony, or kekebo.
Okay.
And it's when the groom's family formally asks for the bride's hand in marriage, but it's not just a casual chat.
Right.
They bring gifts like schnapps and cola nuts and money as a sign of respect, and that their intentions are really serious.
It sounds so much more symbolic than a modern proposal.
It is.
I can't help but imagine, if that were the norm here, proposals would be way less about the size of the diamond.
Yeah.
And way more about, genuine family involvement.
Exactly. And speaking of symbols, did you know that gold plays a huge role in Ashanti weddings?
I did read something about that. Is it just about, the bling, or is there a deeper meaning?
It's way more than just aesthetics. The Ashanti people believe that gold is a gift from their ancestors.
Okay.
And a powerful symbol of both wealth and status. So the bride is adorned with all of this gold jewelry, and it connects the marriage to their heritage and also signifies prosperity for the future.
Wow, that really emphasizes how intertwined cultural values and beliefs can be with the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
It's not just about 2 individuals. It's about family's history, even spirituality.
Right.
Which brings us back to Bonsu's concept of AWAREE, this framework for a thriving marriage. It almost feels like its own framework in a way.
It does. He's very clear that AWAREE applies whether your marriage is rooted in religion or culture,
Okay.
or even just a deep personal commitment. It stands for alignment, willingness, accountability, respect, equity, and endurance.
Okay.
And he says each element is crucial for a healthy relationship.
So let's break that down. Alignment, I think, probably means being on the same page. But what are some common areas where couples can get misaligned?
Oh, Bonsu gives some great examples. It can be finances, career goals, how you want to raise your kids, even just how you spend your free time.
Yeah.
It's not about being identical, but making sure your big picture visions for your life are compatible.
Right.
And that you communicate as you grow and change.
That makes sense. And willingness, is that just another word for effort?
It's more than just showing up. It's about the choice to invest in the relationship, even when it's tough.
Okay.
To be open to compromise, to personal growth, to really putting in the work to make things work.
Yeah.
And he talks about how resentment can build up when one person feels like they're constantly doing all the heavy lifting.
Right.
And that's where willingness comes in.
So it's effort, but effort driven by a genuine desire to build something together, not just out of obligation.
Exactly.
Accountability. This one seems pretty straightforward. What's Bonsu's take?
He talks about being transparent and responsible for your actions. It's about admitting when you've messed up.
Right.
But importantly, setting those clear expectations for things like finances or how you handle conflict, even just basic communication.
Right.
If you're not on the same page about those things, accountability becomes impossible.
Clear expectations, got it. Okay, respect. I feel like that's a core value in any relationship. But how does it play out specifically in the context of marriage?
Well, he talks about how it's about honoring your partner's individuality.
Okay.
So respecting their choices, even if you don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And understanding that their dreams and aspirations might be different from your own.
For sure.
And he cautions against even subtle forms of disrespect.
Oh, yeah.
Like belittling your partner's interests.
Right.
Or dismissing their feelings.
Those little digs could be so damaging over time.
They can.
It's about building each other up, not tearing each other down.
Exactly.
Even unintentionally equity. This one seems tricky. Does it mean splitting every single chore and responsibility down the middle?
Not necessarily. He focuses on fairness.
Okay.
And making sure both partners feel valued and supported. So for instance, he gives the example of a stay-at-home parent whose contributions might not be financially measurable,
right,
but are absolutely essential to the family's well-being.
Of course.
It's about recognizing and appreciating each other's efforts, whatever form they take.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not about keeping score. It's about feeling like you're both pulling your weight and contributing in a way that feels balanced and fair.
Exactly.
Okay, last but not least, endurance. I feel like a lot of people might think that this is just about sticking it out no matter what.
Yeah.
What's Bonsu's perspective?
It's definitely about weathering the storms.
Okay.
But it's not about just, gritting your teeth and bearing it.
Right.
It's about finding solutions together.
Yeah.
And maintaining hope, even in the face of challenges, like financial stress, health issues, or family conflicts.
Okay.
It's about remembering why you chose each other in the first place.
Yeah.
And working as a team to get through those rough patches.
So it's less about enduring and more about proactively navigating those challenges with a sense of shared purpose and resilience.
Exactly.
This AWAREE framework is really comprehensive. It makes you think about any relationship.
It does.
Not just marriage. What are some signs that one or more of these elements might be missing?
He gives some great examples. So if there's constant arguing, or you can feel that resentment brewing, that's often a sign of misalignment or a lack of willingness to compromise.
Got it.
Feeling unheard or disrespected, well, that's a clear sign that respect needs some attention.
Yeah.
If one person feels overwhelmed while the other one feels unappreciated, equity is likely off kilter. But you know what's important is that these aren't deal breakers. These are opportunities to course correct and strengthen your bond.
It's like he's giving us this diagnostic tool for relationships.
Right.
And it makes you realize that even seemingly small issues, if left unaddressed, can really erode those core elements of a healthy partnership.
They do.
Speaking of which, let's shift gears now and talk about how marriage, specifically the legal side, can have real-world consequences that go beyond just the emotional aspects.
You're absolutely right. Bonsu dives into how legal marriage functions as a binding contract.
Okay.
Laying out specific rights and responsibilities, and this is where things get a bit more practical and, dare I say, less romantic.
Let's be honest, prenuptial agreements and divorce proceedings aren't exactly the stuff of fairy tales.
Right.
But why is understanding the legal framework important? Even for those who might be approaching marriage primarily from a religious or cultural perspective.
Because in the eyes of the law, marriage has all of these implications. It impacts everything from property rights and inheritance to parental responsibility.
Wow.
To how assets are divided if the marriage ends.
Right.
It's about having a clear understanding of the legal implications, even if your primary focus is on the spiritual or emotional aspects of the union.
So it's about protecting yourself and your partner, even if you're walking into it with the best of intentions. What are some key aspects of that legal contract that people should be aware of?
He outlines a few really crucial ones. He talks about the requirements for a legally recognized marriage, the rights and responsibilities that come with it, and importantly, how things like divorce and annulment function within that legal framework.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What are some of those basic requirements for a marriage to be legally recognized?
Well, it varies by jurisdiction, of course, but generally it involves things like age of consent,
right,
making sure there are no existing marriages, and often some sort of formal process, whether that's a license, a ceremony, or registration with the state.
So it's not just about declaring your love in front of your friends and family.
Yay.
There's a whole legal process to make it official. And once you're legally married, what are some of those key rights and responsibilities that kick in?
One of the big ones is property rights. So in many places, assets acquired during the marriage are considered joint property.
Okay.
Then there's inheritance, where spouses typically have certain rights.
Got it.
And of course, there's the responsibility of caring for any children born into the marriage.
So it's not just about love and commitment, it's about sharing a legal and financial life together.
It is.
And that can get complicated, especially if the marriage ends. Bonsu mentions divorce and annulment.
Right.
What are the key differences between those two?
Divorce is the legal dissolution of a marriage.
Okay.
It recognizes that the marriage existed but is now ending.
Right.
Annulment is different. It essentially declares that the marriage was never legally valid in the first place.
Oh, wow. So what are some grounds for annulment? It seems like that would be a pretty high bar to clear.
You're right. It's not common. It might be granted in cases of fraud, coercion, or if one party was underage or already married.
Right.
In some cases, it might even involve situations where a couple entered the marriage without fully understanding the legal or religious implications.
That's interesting. So annulment is about more than just a change of heart.
Right.
It's about proving that there were like fundamental flaws with the marriage from the outset.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, how often do people walk down the aisle without really understanding the legal weight of those vows?
That's a great question, and it brings us back to the religious dimension of marriage, which Bonsu explores in depth.
Okay.
He argues that this spiritual aspect can be both the most powerful and the most misunderstood aspect of the whole institution.
I'm really intrigued to hear more about that. But before we dive into the religious framework, I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect on something you said earlier.
Yeah.
Marriage can be this beautiful expression of love and commitment.
It can.
But it also comes with real-world, legal, and financial consequences. It's definitely something to think about, whether you're considering marriage already married or simply curious about this complex institution.
I agree. Yeah, it really is a lot to think about. But I think, that's Bonsu's point. Marriage is this intricate tapestry woven from emotions and traditions.
Right.
And yes, even legal realities, and for many people, that thread that holds it all together is the religious aspect.
Okay, let's talk about that. Bonsu spends quite a bit of time exploring marriage through, like, a Christian lens, specifically.
Yeah.
He even argues that his AWAREE concept goes beyond just being a framework for any marriage, that it's specifically about a godly union between a man and a woman. What do you make of that?
It's interesting, isn't it? He seems to be drawing this distinction between marriage as a social or legal construct and marriage as a spiritual covenant. So for him, AWAREE isn't just about having a good relationship.
Right.
It's about aligning your marriage with what he sees as God's design.
So it's about more than just ticking the boxes of like communication and fairness and all those other elements that we talked about.
Right.
It has to be rooted in a shared faith and a commitment to living out your marriage in accordance with those biblical principles.
Exactly. He even says, a couple can say they're married, but if their union lacks that spiritual foundation, it might not be a true marriage in the eyes of God, even if it's recognized by the state or celebrated by their community.
That's a bold statement. He's essentially saying that a purely secular marriage, even one that embodies all those positive elements of AWAREE, might be missing a crucial ingredient. It raises the question for those who don't subscribe to a religious view of marriage. Do you think Bonsu's framework still holds value?
That's a great question, and it's something that he doesn't explicitly address.
Okay.
My interpretation is that he sees AWAREE as universally applicable.
Okay.
In the sense that those elements are essential for any healthy, thriving relationship.
Right.
But for him, the true essence, the heart of marriage, lies in that spiritual connection.
Got it.
He even compares it to the difference between water baptism and the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Okay, I'm following you. So going through the motions of a wedding ceremony, even a religious one, doesn't automatically guarantee that deeper spiritual bond.
Right.
It's about the inner transformation, the genuine connection, the covenant made before God, not just the outward rituals.
Exactly. And he even says that a pastor's blessing doesn't guarantee that spiritual sealing.
Okay.
It's really up to the couple to cultivate that connection, to live out those principles of AWAREE, and to make their marriage a reflection of their faith.
It's a reminder that even within a religious framework, marriage is still a journey, not a destination.
Right.
It requires continuous effort, growth, and that deep spiritual connection to truly thrive.
Absolutely. And that brings us to this really fascinating point that he makes.
Okay.
The idea that a legal divorce might not necessarily dissolve that spiritual bond.
Oh, wow.
He even quotes Jesus, "What God has joined together, let no one separate."
Wow.
And it really challenges that conventional understanding of what it means to end a marriage, especially for those who believe in its sacred nature.
So he's suggesting that even if the legal contract is dissolved, the spiritual covenant might remain in God's eyes. That's a pretty radical concept, especially in a world where divorce is increasingly common.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what are the implications of that belief for those who are navigating, the complexities of separation and remarriage?
Yeah, it's something to ponder. He doesn't offer any concrete answers.
Right.
But he raises some really thought-provoking questions,
Okay.
How do you reconcile those legal realities with the spiritual beliefs?
Yeah.
How do you move forward with grace and forgiveness while still honoring the sanctity of that original covenant?
Right.
These are really tough questions, and it highlights the tension that can exist between those different frameworks of marriage.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Yeah.
Every couple, every marriage is unique, and navigating these complexities requires a lot of introspection, open communication, and a willingness to seek guidance.
Yeah.
From your faith, from your community, and even legal professionals.
Absolutely. But let's delve a bit deeper into the biblical perspective that Bonsu lays out. He focuses on this concept of oneness.
Okay.
Drawing parallels with the unity of believers in the body of Christ. So he's essentially saying that just as we are called to be one in Christ, a husband and wife are called to be one flesh.
It's a beautiful analogy, isn't it? It speaks to that level of connection, that sense of unity that transcends the individual selves. But he also seems to be careful not to frame it in a way that reinforces like traditional gender roles or hierarchy within the marriage.
Right, you're exactly right. He doesn't delve into specific roles, but he does emphasize that this oneness is about mutual service.
Okay.
It's about putting your partner's needs before his own, about working together as a team. He even uses that analogy of the body of Christ where each part has this unique function, but they all work together for the good of the whole.
So it's not about one spouse being the head, the other being subservient. It's about recognizing that each person brings their own strengths and talents to the marriage.
Right.
And that unity comes from valuing and respecting those differences.
Exactly. It's about complementing each other, supporting each other, and working together towards that shared vision. And this idea of shared responsibility also plays into how Bonsu addresses the topic of sex within marriage.
This is where things can get a little tricky, especially when navigating those biblical interpretations.
Right.
What are some of the key takeaways from Bonsu's discussion on sex and marriage?
He's very clear that from a biblical perspective, marriage is the only appropriate context for sexual intimacy.
Okay.
He cites passages like Hebrews 13.4, which talks about honoring the marriage bed, and he emphasizes God's judgment against adultery and sexual immorality.
It's a reminder that for those who approach marriage from a faith-based perspective, sex isn't just a physical act, it's a sacred expression of love commitment and that spiritual bond that we've been talking about.
Exactly. And Bonsu even brings up the topic of polygamy, acknowledging its presence in the Old Testament.
Okay.
He cites examples like Abraham, Jacob, and King Solomon, all of whom had multiple wives.
It's something that often comes up in discussions about biblical interpretations of marriage. What's Bonsu's take on it? Is he like condoning it or condemning it?
He's very careful not to do either.
Okay.
He presents it as a practice that was permitted under certain circumstances in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Often tied to cultural norms and practical considerations, like inheritance and managing large households.
So it was more about reflecting the social context of the time, not necessarily a divine mandate for all marriages.
That seems to be his point. And he goes on to point out that there's a clear shift towards monogamy in the New Testament.
Got it.
And he suggests that this change was influenced by both spiritual principles and the cultural landscape of the Roman Empire, which favored monogamous relationships.
It's fascinating how those social and historical contexts can really shape religious teachings, isn't it?
It is.
It reminds us that interpreting the Bible isn't always about taking things literally. It's about understanding the historical and cultural nuances that influence those writings.
Absolutely. And Bonsu supports this shift by referencing the Apostle Paul's teachings, where he emphasizes monogamy, especially for leaders within the church. He cites passages like 1 Timothy 3.2 and Titus 1.6, which outline the qualities expected of church leaders, including being the husband of one wife.
So it wasn't necessarily like a complete rejection of polygamy as inherently sinful, but more about aligning with the prevailing social norms and avoiding scandal within the Roman society.
Precisely. And to further reinforce this idea of monogamy, Bonsu points to how Paul uses marriage as a metaphor for the relationship between Christ and the church.
Ah, yes, he references Ephesians 5.31-32, where Paul compares marriage to the profound mystery of Christ's love for his church.
Right.
And in that analogy, it's clearly a one-to-one relationship.
Exactly. It's this powerful way to elevate marriage to a sacred level, emphasizing the exclusivity and faithfulness within a monogamous union.
It's interesting how these biblical interpretations can vary so widely. Some people interpret those Old Testament examples as a justification for polygamy.
Right.
While others like Bonsu see this clear progression towards monogamy as the ideal, it highlights the importance of critical thinking and thoughtful interpretation when engaging with religious texts.
Absolutely. It's definitely not a black and white issue. And ultimately, Bonsu seems to be suggesting that regardless of its form, God's intention for marriage has always been rooted in love, faithfulness, and unity.
Those are values that resonate with anyone seeking a strong and lasting relationship regardless of their religious beliefs.
Right.
But Bonsu doesn't shy away from the fact that living out those values in the context of marriage can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
He even compares building a successful marriage to running a successful business.
It's an interesting analogy.
It is. It takes the romance out of it a bit, but it also highlights the reality that marriage requires work,
right,
dedication, and a shared commitment to growth. It's not just about finding the right person, it's about making the choice every day to nurture that relationship and build something lasting together.
Absolutely. And he even provides some practical advice for achieving that.
Oh, like...
He suggests attending workshops, reading books, seeking counseling, even just having regular date nights to keep that connection strong.
So it's about being proactive.
Yeah.
Not waiting for things to fall apart before seeking help or investing in the relationship.
Right.
It's about recognizing that even the strongest marriages can benefit from regular maintenance and care. And that brings us back to that final thought that you mentioned earlier. I'm ready to hear what you've been pondering.
Well, we spent all this time exploring marriage through all these different lenses, religious, cultural, legal, even the practical stuff. But it's got me thinking, what if we just step outside of all those established frameworks?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. You're talking about going beyond like the traditional definitions of marriage, right?
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave our listeners with this challenge. Don't be afraid to question those assumptions. Don't be afraid to explore new possibilities, and don't be afraid to define marriage on your own terms.
Well said. And may that journey of exploration lead you to a deeper understanding of yourself, your relationships, and the boundless potential of human connection.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the multifaceted world of marriage. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.